the seminary. Mr. Hamish Snedden, who's an elder at Dundee. Dundee, yes. It's Reverend David MacLeod, he's minister in Harris. There's Donald Stirling, who's an elder in Roskeen. Dr. McLean, who's minister at Greyfriars and Inverness.
Well, I was spent some time in the army at Fort George, but I don't think we ever got to your church. We had a chapel in Fort George itself, which is where we used to.
Mr. Colin Campbell, who's an elder in Knock Free Church in Lewis.
Oh, you're another Western Isles. Yes. Well, it makes me all the more keen.
Yes, indeed. There's Reverend Angus McRae, who's minister in the North. He's also chairman of our seminary board. Board of Ministry, yes. And finally, Reverend Angus Howard, who's assistant clerk of assembly.
And you have a big job to do this week.
Yes, I keep the minutes.
A lot of planning.
Yes.
Are you responsible for the program as well?
Well, three of us
We
work
shared it,
together.
yeah, we shared it out, so
And,
it's quite a bit of work in advance of this.
clear up afterwards.
Do you have a sort of on the minutes sort of looked at each day to just check that?
Yeah.
Yes, and I haven't been too bad this week. They've been very kind.
He's used to it by now. He's a very efficient Moderator, may I introduce His Grace, the Lord High Commissioner. Please welcome him and invite him to address the Assembly.
Nice to meet you. And we're delighted to have you with us, and we do pray God's blessing on you, and we look forward to hear what you have to say to us.
Thank you very much.
Please do feel free to address the Assembly.
Yes, where would you like to say?
If you would stand there. And there.
Moderator, fathers and brethren, thank you very much for your kind and generous welcome. It is a real privilege for me to have been given this opportunity to address the General Assembly of the Free Church of Scotland as Lord High Commissioner. And Moderator, may I congratulate you most warmly on your appointment and wish you a most successful and fulfilling period in office. Moderator, fathers and brethren, please be seated. I know that some of my recent predecessors as Lord High Commissioner have been able to speak about their connections with the Free Church of Scotland. You may remember Lord Selkirk of Douglas, who came here just a few years ago, and he told you that his wife's great-grandfather had been a minister of the church. I can't claim to have any links with the Free Church of that kind. But as I look back over my own family's history, there are aspects of it that I think are worth mentioning as I have the honor of speaking to you today. Let me first take the clock back some 170 years to the events of the 1840s, which laid the foundations for your history. I fear that had I come here in, let's say, 1845, I doubt whether the welcome I received at the door would be quite the same as you would have given me today. Indeed, I'm not sure I would have been welcomed here at all. You see, the name Hope was very well known in those days in church circles, and my predecessors, the Hopes of those days, were certainly not backwards in making their views known. One of my ancestors was Lord President Charles Hope, who by 1845 had recently retired from that office. His eldest son and my great-great-grand-uncle was John Hope, who was a former Dean of the Faculty of Advocates, and by 1845 was the Lord Justice Clerk. And both of them were deeply involved in the struggle between the two opposing groups within the Church of Scotland. The Hopes were prominent in the groups known as the Moderates, but it was from the other group, I think called the Evangelicals, that the Free Church was founded. Now, it's not the occasion to go into the details, and I'm sure many of you know them anyway, but just to remind those, or those who tell those who didn't know the details, the moderates, I should say, that's my family group, as it were dominated by ministers who had been appointed under a system of patronage, which did not depend on the congregation's consent to their appointment. They had no veto, in other words. The other group was uneasy about patronage as a principle and were seeking its abolition. And then in 1834, Dr. Chalmers was a prominent figure in the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. And under his leadership, the General Assembly passed an act which did give a veto on any appointment. It was given to the heads of the congregations to appointments made under the system of patronage. The act was called the Veto Act. And perhaps to my embarrassment, Lord President Hope and John Hope, the then Dean of Faculty, and the President's son, voted against it. And then began the constitutional battle. And it was called a constitutional battle because it was a battle, really, between the church and the courts. And the atmosphere, as you can imagine, and indeed the degree of public interest in what was going on, was intense. A few months after the Veto Act was passed, a gentleman named Mr. Young was nominated by the Earl of Kinnoul to be the minister at Auchterarder, and that was under the patronage system, as you would understand. Now, his nomination was dissented to by almost all those in the congregation who had a vote under the Veto Act. So the presbytery was able to declare under the Veto Act that the call was not a good one. And that was taken to the General Assembly, who backed the presbytery, whereupon my great-great-grand-uncle, John Hope, raised an action in the Court of Session, of which his father was president, challenging the decision to reject the nominee. Now, there was a question, which was, in fact, an extremely interesting question, as to whether this Veto Act was within the jurisdiction of the Church. And the majority on the court, not all the judges were agreed, but the majority, including my great-great-grandfather, Lord President Hope, held that it was not within the power of the Assembly, the General Assembly, to determine its jurisdiction. So they set aside this decision. There was an appeal to the House of Lords, and that did not succeed. And it created a great dilemma, as you can imagine, for Dr. Chalmers and those who were with him as to what they should do. And as time went on, as you can sympathize with him and his followers, there was really only one answer. And it was on the 18th of May, 1843, very close in date to today, that in St. Andrew's Church in George Street, the Lord High Commissioner was there, and so was my great-great-grand-uncle John Hope. And the retiring moderator, Dr. Welsh, led the assembled ministers and elders in prayer, and then he read out a protest at the way the rights and privileges of the church had been treated, took his hat, and walked out of the church. And he was followed by some 200 ministers who went down to the Tanfield Hall in Cannon Mills, where Dr. Chalmers was elected as the first moderator of your church. My great-great-grand-uncle John Hope remained in his seat, and so it was that he and the Lord High Commissioner were left behind, and this procession went down the hill to the Canongate. it was actually suspected that he had been the mastermind behind the actions in Canoe that had given rise to this case in the first place. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but there was a good deal going on. And as I say, my family was deeply involved. And that's why I would have felt very uneasy in the 1840s. But I do have a much happier story to tell you, which brings us much more up to date, because my own father was a very active member of the church. He was session clerk of St. George's in St. Andrew's Square for many, many years. And St. George's Church was the church in which the Reverend Andrew Thompson was the minister and was the leader of the evangelicals before, on his death, that passed to Dr. Chalmers. So it's a curious link through that. And it was Dr. Thompson, Reverend Andrew Thompson, who wrote that wonderful, fine tune, St. George's Edinburgh, which we sing to Psalm 24. Well, my father was with us on holiday near Strome Ferry in, I think, 1953. And as was his practice, he went to the church nearby for the Sunday service. He didn't take us, we were really quite small at the time. And he chose, as it happened, the free church to go to for his Sunday service. And he was one of these people who had, the Christian churches had no boundaries, really. He felt everybody should be able to go into each other's churches. And I'm sure he would have introduced himself to the minister, as he always did. I am the session clerk of St. George's Edinburgh. And he was given a very warm welcome. He sat in the front row, which he liked to do. And he was then received a very unexpected compliment from the minister, because at the start of the service, the minister smiled at him and announced, "Our visitor will lead the praise." Now, for most people, that would be a very daunting thing, but of course, my father had up his sleeve the tune of St. George's Edinburgh, and it somehow fitted into the praise very well. And he came back full of delight at having had this wonderful reception from the church, and how he'd been invited, he'd been given this great compliment and been able to respond to it. So that is something in my memory which is a point of contact. But there is another one too, which is a slightly different thing, because the name of Dr. Chalmers was often mentioned by my father, and he was referred to invariably as the great Dr. Chalmers. This was usually when we as children were doing something which my father thought we should not do, such as gobbling our food at table when we were having Sunday lunch. He would say, "The great Dr. Chalmers always chewed his food 32 times. And we were encouraged to follow his example. And because it was the example of the great Dr. Chalmers, there was no room for argument. It wouldn't have done, for example, for us children to even suggest that the reason why Dr. Chalmers was chewing 32 times had something to do with the food that he was eating. I mean, that certainly wouldn't have been acceptable. I never got round to asking my father why these references to, or where the references to the great Dr. Chalmers came from. But I think if you think back a bit, I suspect he was repeating to us what he'd been told by his own father, who mentioned the great Dr. Chalmers in these contexts, and probably also his father before him, his father before him was born in 1833, and would be a boy when the events that I was describing earlier took place. And these dates sort of pull together in a way, but it's quite interesting. My own father was born only 49 years after Dr. Chalmers' death. So in his day, as a child, Dr. Chalmers was well known by many, many people, and widely respected. And for me, because of this history, it's a name that still means a great deal to me. And it's really why I've come here with a great deal of respect and personal goodwill for your church and the history which I've been touching on. So I am detaching myself rather from the ancestors in the 1840s and aligning myself with my own father, who would have been hugely delighted to come here with me and just share again the experience that he met with that Sunday morning in Strome Ferry. Moderator, fathers and brethren, thank you very much indeed for allowing me, and indeed us, my sweet with me, to come here today, and for the generous, kindly welcome you've given me. Moderator, fathers, and members of the General Assembly, may God bless your deliberations.
Your Grace, thank you so much. In my head, I'm thinking, what would Chalmers say? It was a privilege and a pleasure to be with you the other night at Holyrood Palace. When you came here, I wasn't expecting you to come with such a penitent attitude, seeking absolution for the sins of your fathers. But we forgive you. And we don't hold the sins of the fathers against the children. But thank you for your interest in the Free Church and for what you said. I am intrigued by the legal mind and the way that lawyers think, and you come from this generation of very sharp thinkers, and I hope that the interaction between religion, faith, and law, I hope we'll be able to consider it a bit more, because in these days it's coming more and more how these things work out. I do understand you also have other connections with us. If you are claiming to be in the party of the moderates, we do feel that you should cross the floor of the House, if you like, because I believe that you knew a good friend of ours, Lord Mackay, very well, and I'm sure he taught you about why the evangelicals were absolutely right. But I want to give you some gifts. I'm sorry, I couldn't make up my mind, so I decided to give you several. It was clear you're interested in history. This is probably the best biography of John Knox that's just come out. So I think you'll enjoy that. This is a book that I think is a wonderful book about where our legal system comes from, actually, amongst other things. It's called The Book That Made Your World, How the Bible Created the Soul of Western Civilization. And it's by an Indian called Vishnu Mangalwadi, and I found it absolutely fascinating, and I'd be interested to hear your comments on it. And then this is from a well-known Scottish preacher evangelical who actually works with me in St. Peter's in Dundee, Sinclair Ferguson. It is about the actual Bible itself, from the mouth of God, which explains our thinking. And as I say, we have a passion about many, many things, history, and we've been talking about lots of things in the church. But our great passion is Jesus Christ, and we are always looking at ways to communicate him in this current world. And this is maybe a bit arrogant, but I wrote this book about Christ for many people, and again, you'll read all those in about a week. So, but thank you so much, and please thank Her Majesty for recognizing us in this way, and thank you for speaking to us, and we pray that God would bless you and all those who are with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Do you want to come? Now, Abigail would like to present Your Grace. Please. Thank you. Thank you, Abigail. I know, it was lovely to see you, actually. There's no... I hope we will be able to meet again as well. Thank you very much. No. You've got so much free time, of course. Absolutely, absolutely. There's no... Thank you very much. Could I ask you please to stand?